On happy Monday. Not such a happy Monday for the Duke of York, or maybe the former Duke of York. Not quite sure where that is at the moment. But what I wanted to discuss, I wouldn't normally discuss stuff like this because there's an element to which obviously anything to do with the royal family is political. But sometimes it strays into celebrity news. But this is political because this is about his public role, right? Now, what I want to do is I'll go through a couple of comments first, but I want to just show people something you may not be aware of. So James there saying private members bill to permanently strip Randy of titles as well as to remove the Windsor name from him, from York MP Rachel Maskell. Yeah, I'd seen that. I'm not sure why she's doing it as a private members bill, because let's listen to this, right? Let's go through this. So the Mail yesterday. Now, I think technically this probably would have been written for the Mail on Sunday. Now, the Mail on Sunday is different to the Daily Mail. It's got different editors, sort of different. But on the website, it's all the Daily Mail, right? So they're still owned by the same people and all the rest of it. So that's important for later. Now, I want to just go over this. So this is what they wrote yesterday, but have updated today, right? This is important because I want to counterpoint it with something you may not be aware of, right? So exclusive, right? Exclusive. So that suggests they've got some inside information on this. Important. King's threat to shame Andrew by stripping titles. Monarch made clear he would take further action to remove the prince's honours after disgraced royal tried to dig his heels in. So the king threatened to have Prince Andrew officially stripped of his titles unless he saw sense, in quotation marks. Charles, 76, made clear, I don't know what his age has got to do with it. It's just what journalists do, isn't it? They always put someone's age after their name for some reason. It's got no bearing on the story. Made clear he would not hesitate to take decisive further action if his brother refused to give up his dukedom and other honours after he lied about cutting ties with paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. It can be revealed. Now, you may ask yourself, why is the king saying to his brother, give up your titles voluntarily or I will remove them? Why doesn't Charles just remove them? Well, this is important, and this is where it comes to this idea of a private members bill, which, by the way, is pointless. It says here, the only way for Charles to legally strip Andrew of his titles would have been to take it through Parliament. In other words, Charles doesn't actually have, remember, we have a constitutional monarch. He doesn't actually have the power to do anything, really, which is, you know, quite a good thing. We don't have an absolute monarch, so he doesn't actually have executive powers. Like he can manage things around his own household and some of his duties and stuff, but he doesn't actually have executive powers in the way you might think. So if Charles were to force those titles, if Andrew just didn't give them up voluntarily, if he had to force them off him, he'd effectively have to ask Parliament to do it, right? Which is what Rachel Maskell is attempting to do. But her private members bill, I don't know what she's doing it for. It's just really a publicity stunt. If a bill goes through Parliament, it'll come from the king, not from her. Right, but last week he privately made clear to Andrew that a raft of options were open to him if he did not fall on his sword. Some have questioned whether the act of making Queen Elizabeth's second son simply set aside his titles is adequate in the circumstances. Now, the real point I want to make here is not so much the legal process to strip him, because that's, at this point, only an issue if Andrew... So basically, the suggestion from this article, if you read the whole thing, is Andrew is either going to voluntarily just step aside, or Charles is going to say, you are too much of a liability, my old brother. I'm going to have to go through Parliament. In other words, the king, even though that would attract further scandal, obviously, if this is accurate, and we assume it is accurate, right, because the Daily Mail's hardly anti-monarchy, yeah? If this article is accurate and they do have inside information, the implication is that Charles thinks it's less damaging to put a bill through Parliament, or to ask, because he can't do it, ask Parliament to put a bill through to strip Andrew of his official titles and rights. That would be less damaging than not doing it, right? So what he's trying to do, but the argument in the article is, Rachel Maskell's independent, formerly Labour, yeah. But but again, it still makes no point. She's just really trying to make a name for herself, as far as I can tell, because the the reason why, so you say to yourself, why isn't Charles just putting this bill through Parliament? You might say that it will reduce the level of scandal if Andrew just voluntarily gives them up. But the other reason given is a bill going through Parliament takes up parliamentary time. That is parliamentary time that at the moment the government is trying to fill up with its own legislative agenda, right? So the government won't necessarily welcome loads of parliamentary time being taken up with this nonce, right? But here's where it's interesting, right? So the Daily Mail here they're painting Andrew as the problem, right? I mean, how can you deny it? Andrew has caused this massive problem for the royal family. He's like brought them into disrepute, even though as far as anyone can tell, Andrew is the only one who behaved improperly where Epstein is regarded. But he's brought the royal family into disrepute. He cannot have public duties. He can't be a stand-in for the king, because that's one of the problems, that Andrew technically is on the list of stand-ins. If Charles is ill, and obviously he's had cancer treatment and stuff, he's old, it's entirely possible, you know. So what they don't want is Andrew stepping in for him in official functions, right? Now, let's get rid of this and let us just have a look at another story from the Daily Mail, right? This is from earlier this year, with a very different tone. Really I have linked this in the description below because it's very interesting if you look at it in the context of how the Daily Mail are reporting things now. So this was in the Daily Mail in February this year. Angela Rayner launched astonishing tirade against that nonce Prince Andrew to get him removed from official list of deputies to Charles, authors claim in new book. So I'll go through the details in a minute, but look at the language of that headline. They're basically saying, so Angela Rayner, this was a few years ago, this was when Charles was acceding to the throne, and she at the time had said, I'll go through it in a minute, she at the time had suggested that, so you draw up this list of senior royals who will step in for the king when needed, right? So Charles, right, even if he wasn't old, there's always a possibility the monarch could fall ill and need hospital treatment or something, and you need a stand-in, right? It's a ceremonial role, but nonetheless you need that figurehead. So there's a list of senior royals who will be called upon to fill that role. So 2022, Liz Truss has killed the Queen. So Charles is going to become king. And Angela Rayner, who at the time was in opposition, but she was going to be in the role of she was deputy leader. She was going to be acting as deputy prime minister when Labour won the election. But at the time they were in opposition. She had actually tried to contact the palace. I'll go through the details in a minute, but she tried to contact them and said, look, Andrew shouldn't be on that list. I will give you Labour's support to not have him on the list, basically. She'd basically said to the palace, this is going to be a bad look. This is going to backfire on you if Andrew has any official role, right? Now, let's go through some of the details in this. Because remember, the Daily Mail now is describing Andrew as a problem, right? They're saying that him having a public role is a problem. They're saying that Andrew should not have a public role. That is their editorial position now. This is only like earlier this year. This is how they write it. Angela Rayner waged a private battle to stop, quote, that nonce Prince Andrew from ever standing in for his brother the king, it was claimed yesterday. The Deputy Prime Minister reportedly fought to get the Duke of York removed from the official list of deputies to Charles if he was abroad or incapacitated. According to Get In, a new book on Labour's journey to power, Ms Rayner could not accept any deputy role for Andrew over his controversial links with paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. She allegedly said, I'm not going to vote to keep that nonce on. I can't go back to my constituency and say, yeah, I support that. The reports came as the Duke of York faced claims of selective amnesia over his contacts with disgraced financier who was disgraced financier, disgraced nonce. It wasn't his financial affairs that were considered particularly dodgy, although there was a bit of that as well, wasn't there? Who was found hanged in his prison cell in 2019 while awaiting his trial on sex trafficking charges. So there's a story here in the Daily Mail. I'll go on, actually. It says here, an advisor reportedly said she was very actively reaching out to the palace, the upper echelons of the civil service, and she said she thought this was a huge problem and that the government, which was the Conservative government at the time, needed to address this, and she would offer cross-party support to make it happen. In other words, she was saying, we're not going to make a political issue out of this. We will lend you our support because, you know, this will blow up in our faces later on, right? And they're attacking it. It says here, the aide added that Ms. Rayner was not anti-monarchist and reportedly summed her view as, I know how difficult it is to be in a big dysfunctional family. In the event, the law was changed to add Princess Anne and Prince Andrew to the list of councillors of state in what was seen as a diplomatic way of avoiding Andrew standing in. However, Andrew was still on the list. It says here, Ms. Rayner was privately furious that Andrew would still technically be on the list, telling her staff, I'm not going to vote to keep that nonce on. She then apparently made her views known in a Zoom meeting with then Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, but reportedly emerged from the meeting chastened. In other words, she was told off for this. An advisor said she never ever spoke about the royals like that again. Well, she weren't speaking about the royals. She was speaking about one royal that the Daily Mail and frankly everyone else, including the king, his brother, now accepts is a massive problem. And you think to yourself, maybe they should have listened to her back then. Maybe they actually should have listened, because this is 2022. So there is some stuff that's come out since, right? But nonetheless, it was known at the time that Andrew had been involved in, quite frankly, like, you know, well, like trafficking, sex trafficking, basically. And although some of the things we know now were not necessarily known at the time, Rayner could see that this is going to blow up on her. She wasn't trying to make an issue of it. She was just saying, don't have Andrew on the official list because it's going to blow up in your face. But anyway, if this is Stowe and he stands trial, he does so as a commoner. Well, well, yeah, I suppose so. But what trial? There won't be a trial, will there? The victim, I mean, you know, the victim's unfortunately killed herself. So there's no one to accuse him. So there won't be a trial unless other victims come forwards. And even then, unless someone can allege that he committed the crime in this country, there still won't be. The Tory papers will somehow try to blame it on Harry and Meghan. Piers Morgan will, won't he? Oh, should we have a look at Piers Morgan? Oh, hang on. Should we have a look at Piers Morgan, what he's got to say about it? I'm just going to have a quick look at his... or Dan Wootton. They both do that a lot, don't they? I'm going to have a little look. Is thunder in there, Phil? Heard a rumble? No, you may hear my computer fan. I don't know why. When I got this computer, for some reason, I usually get like really quiet liquid cooling and stuff. And for some reason, I really honestly don't remember why I didn't for this one. Don't worry, I'll be due for a new computer next year. I don't know why I didn't do it for this one. No idea. But you will sometimes hear the computer fan. It's a bit beefy. It's a big computer, a lot of processing. So the fan does sort of work. I'm just going to have a look if Piers Morgan's got his little YouTube channel. There's a title here from 2 days ago. Professional con man, in quotation marks. Prince Andrew Epstein leak causes major crisis for royals. Well, he hasn't blamed it on Harry yet. Sure, he hasn't blamed it on Harry yet, or Meghan. The Mail never knowingly on the right side of history. No. I mean, it's quite remarkable. And I'll tell you what's remarkable. So back in 2020, this would be late 2022, when Angela Rayner would have approached the palace and said, look, this isn't a good idea. Don't put him on the list, right? I will, give you Labour's support for this. It'll all be done. She wasn't, going to make a party political issue out of it. It was a private offer. It was like, this is going to be bad for all of us. This isn't anything to fall out over. This is going to be bad for all of us. Let's be sensible here. And they completely ignored her. And I'm guessing, although the Daily Mail characterised it as Angela Rayner waged a private battle, that won't be true, because Angela Rayner will have been doing it on behalf of Labour. This will have been discussed at shadow cabinet level. She will presumably have had everyone else's, or at least certainly Starmer's, because obviously Angela Rayner could not herself pledge the support of Labour unilaterally, right? She would at least need Starmer's support. So this, although they're in that article painting it as Angela Rayner waging a private battle, which is exactly how they phrased it, it won't be. This will have been an offer from Labour that she presented to the palace and to the cabinet secretary and to the Tory government. And they all went. And it's utterly incredible, isn't it, that they didn't see the wisdom in it. But what's remarkable is, so this was back in 2022, but that article in the Daily Mail was February this year. So in February this year, we knew more than even in 2022. And the Daily Mail still thought it was a good idea to report on Angela Rayner's attempt to basically, frankly, save the royals from a scandal. That was what, if Prince Andrew had already not had any public role, he should have had his public roles completely stripped away after he bought off Virginia Giuffre. Because at that point, because there was no reason to settle out of court if he thought he was going to win. Because remember, Andrew was the accused in that civil case. He was the accused, right? He didn't have to prove he was innocent. He didn't have to prove he was innocent. The burden of proof was on her. So by him paying, what was it, 12 million quid, the Queen's money, he didn't have the money himself, paying that money to settle out of court, after it, so the thing is as well, it's not even early on. It's not even like, oh, I'm settling out of court because it's just cheaper. I don't want the hassle. It was a very late stage, if you remember. It was very late stage that he settled out of court. In fact, I remember expert lawyers at the time saying it was remarkable that they went for that long. I remember David Alan Green, who's an expert in public law, saying it was quite remarkable that it went as long as it did. It says if you were, his lawyers will have known what evidence there was against him, and if it didn't look good, you would settle much earlier. So they literally settled on the eve of the court taking place. Oh, it's $12 million US. Thank you. So that's still probably about what, 10 million quid, not far off. So it's remarkable. If he thought he was going to win, there wasn't that much further to go. And again, for Andrew to win, he didn't have to prove he was innocent. He didn't have to prove that the things he was accused of definitely didn't happen. She had to prove they did. And if he settled out of court, when someone settles out of court at the last minute, at the 11th hour, it means they're going to lose. Their lawyers have told them, you're going to lose. Right? So that's why. And it probably wouldn't have cost him any more to have gone through the process and be found. He just didn't want that official guilty, right? So basically, we know he is guilty. We know that there was the evidence there to prove him guilty because he only paid her off at the last minute. That is as conclusive evidence of guilt as you can get without the actual guilty verdict, right? It just means all Andrew gained out of that court case was that journalists cannot say he's guilty, because he'll say, hang on a minute, you've got no proof for that, I'm going to sue you, right? Okay, so you cannot definitively say he's guilty because a court hasn't said so, but it's pretty bloody clear that there was evidence there. With a gag order to prevent talking until tomorrow with the posthumous book. Yeah. Well, that's standard though, isn't it? But again, you know, a lot of the accusations had already come out anyway because it was part of the case. So that was already public. So a lot of the accusations were public anyway. So in a way, she was allowed to talk about it because that was through the court files. Utterly remarkable that at that point where he had to get money off his mother to pay her off, everyone at that point knows that he's a liability to the royal family. Frankly, I mean, I actually thought at the time when Charles was succeeding that he wasn't going to. I mean, there was a question earlier on as to why Andrew was like the Queen's favourite. I mean, sometimes it's just like Andrew was always reportedly like the most mischievous. I mean, this is more than mischief, you know, but, you know, even as a young lad, right? Sometimes parents just like the scamp, don't they, of their children. I mean, you shouldn't really have favourites at all, and you certainly shouldn't make it clear you've got a favourite. But, you know, parents do sometimes have a favourite. And sometimes their favourite is just the one, like if you've got one child that is always getting into trouble and the other one behaves, then probably the one that behaves is your favourite, right? But sometimes when it's just a personality thing, sometimes you just like the rogue. Your parents just like your impish little child, don't they? But I mean, when Charles became king, there was absolutely no need for it. I mean, he's still his brother, yeah, okay, but there was no need to keep Andrew on. I really don't know why. I really don't know why. Not just that they ignored Rayner, why they all didn't see what Rayner saw. I don't get it. But anyway. Alan Barton, the Antiquary channel, did an interesting video on these titles, etc. King can't remove them. He's not giving anything up because he can't. Well, yeah, that's as the Daily Mail are reporting on it. That, you know, I think what they're after here is for Andrew to just voluntarily give. And yeah, I appreciate that. Also, he will still technically have the titles, but as long as he doesn't use them. If he doesn't use the titles in any correspondence, he doesn't attempt to have any role in public life. If he doesn't attempt to have any of the benefits that come with them, they may consider the matter dealt with. The argument being that to remove them requires parliamentary time, and the government is, you know, has use for that parliamentary time. It will delay other legislation. I don't know how much parliamentary time it would take. Is it, for example, one of those things? You know how, you know, Parliament came in and sat on it's done it a few times in the last few years, has it come in and sat on a Saturday just to pass emergency legislation? Could it do that? I honestly don't know. Could it do that? You know, if there's clear support for it. If the King himself asks Parliament, can you pass this bill, please? Probably not many would deny, because then they'd have to be going against the King. So you've got a mix. You've got MPs who are sort of anti-monarchist, but they also don't want Andrew to have a royal title, so they will vote for it. Then you've got ones who are pro-monarchy. They don't want to cause a schism with the monarchy, particularly over an issue like this. So it's probably one of those things where literally nobody would vote against it. So is it something you could draft really quickly, ram it through Parliament quickly, that even the House of Lords wouldn't be difficult about, and get it through, you know, really quickly? If so, then you just do that, wouldn't you? Really should stop the Daily Mail flaunting its curves and force it to publish news as news and put the snide opinion stuff in their opinion section as done in Australia. Yeah, I mean, some media outlets are better at that than others, aren't they? Yeah, it's if you do look at some media outlets in this country, and some of them are clear about what is their news content and what is their opinion content. The Guardian separate it out. I think even the Telegraph, to be fair, don't quote me on that, but I think even the Telegraph separate them out, and the Times, I think most of them do. But yeah, the Daily Mail doesn't. If I'm looking at the Daily Mail now, that Angela Rayner piece, although it is news as well, the fact that they clearly use language that's intended to get you to think a particular way about the rights and wrongs of it, is so they can claim it's news because what they're posting is factual. It's just that they're using illustrative language. They're using adjectives basically to try and get you to think a particular way about it. So, yeah. But they don't actually, on the Daily Mail, they don't have an opinion section. They don't actually, I mean, I'm looking at it here, there is no opinion section. You've got home, news, royals, US sport, TV, showbiz, female, health, science, money, travel, podcast, byline. Yeah, no opinion. But anyway, never mind. Charles probably wouldn't want to imply that his mother made a mistake. Well, no, when he's king, he can do his own thing. He's already done some things different to his mother anyway. He's different. William will be different still. I mean, you know, they can do different. It's up to Charles who are his deputies, really. So I really don't see why that would have been an issue. The fact that, as it said in that article, the fact that they added Edward and Anne to the list means that there was already... I mean, that was done. It's suggested in the article the reason that was done was so that it had a greater list of people who... So in other words, it would be easy to just... Although in theory Andrew might be called to step in, because you've given yourself a longer list, you can always choose someone else. Whereas if the list is too short, if the king's out of the country or something and then one of the others is incapacitated and it's like, and Andrew's the only one left, you're stuck. So they lengthened the list, according to the article, to reduce the need to use Andrew. But, you know, as Rayner suggested, he shouldn't have even been... Because the fact that he's even on the list means that, in theory, he could step in for the king, which, like, no one wants. Still don't get why everyone celebrated the Jubilee after all that shit. Well, it's nothing to do with any of the rest of them. You know, I mean... And this is entirely on Andrew in terms of his behaviour. You know, I know some people criticise the Queen for giving them money to pay her off, but that's really because they wanted to see the trial go to its full distance, right? I mean, I would have done. But at the end of the day, it's a mother trying to help her son. I mean, most mothers would do the same thing. Like, most mothers would try and help their wayward offspring get out of trouble. The difference in this case is because, you know, Andrew's a very public figure, and obviously the Queen's an even more public figure, or was. To think for all the stick Labour comms gets, rightly to some extent, well, to a lot of extent, how the Royal comms manages to evade such criticism beyond me. Maybe they should take over Labour comms. Well, no, I mean, it's because... For various reasons, the media are rarely going to hammer the royals on anything. I mean, something like this, it's because it's too late, you can't hide it. You know, so you can't hide something like this so that the media have to comment on it. But that's really the reason. And there's various reasons why the media won't, like, be super critical of the royal family. The first is that some of them are just monarchists, or they're writing for an audience that's very pro-monarchy and they wouldn't consider it acceptable. The second reason is because the royals have to be politically neutral, then there's a sort of unwritten rule that the media should also be royally neutral as well. You know, in other words, there's a... Even for the hacks of Fleet Street, well, it's not really Fleet Street anymore, you know, it's considered unsporting to attack someone who's not allowed to defend themselves. So there's all sorts of reasons in there. But there it is. Protecting someone from the consequence of their actions isn't protecting children. It harms them and is probably what led to his actions. No. The actions were long gone. But again, anyone would do the same thing. Like any parent would do the same thing for their kids. It's you know, it's not right. You know, you could argue we should have a system that doesn't allow for it. It doesn't allow... Like, for example, I mean, what I would say is, why was it a civil case? What you were talking about was serious crimes. This is my. I mean, I have two major issues with our justice system. When I mean our justice system, I don't just mean Britain's, but globally, internationally, I have two major problems with the justice system. The first of which is that civil justice is only available if you can afford it, right? If someone defames you, you can't sue them unless you can afford to hire lawyers. You can't go to the police and say that person has caused me material harm maliciously, because if it's not a matter of criminal law, you get there's no public service to help you. But it works the other way, because if someone sues you for defamation, if you cannot afford to defend yourself, then they will win. It's like in a poker game, isn't it? If you have no limits, whoever's got the biggest pot will win, because they can just keep raising the stakes. So, you know, it's the same thing here. So you can be forced to retract a true statement, and people have been. There have been vexatious lawsuits that have forced people who have not defamed someone, but because they can't afford for it to go to full trial. They cannot physically afford the legal fees. So that's unjust. But then there's a second side to it as well. And that is, in this particular case, Andrew was accused of committing serious criminal offences. Why was it left to her to sue him in a civil case? It wasn't civil law, it was criminal law. So, although she obviously couldn't sue him under criminal law, she had to sue him for like material harm to herself, right? That, you know, but why? If she had evidence that he was guilty, then she had evidence he was guilty of crimes, because the same thing that caused her harm and she could pursue in the civil courts is all. And I know there's a higher bar for criminal conviction. I get that. But if she had the evidence that meant it was worth his mum's while shelling over 10 million quid, $12 million, to at the last minute stop the case, then surely she had enough evidence for a prosecution service presumably in the United States to have charged him. So why didn't that happen? So those are for me, those are two sources of massive injustice we have globally. The first is that civil justice is justice for those who can afford it. Whether you are the accused or the accuser, you can only get civil justice. You can only get justice for civil law if you can afford it, to pursue it. And even criminal, you know, very often criminals get off where they shouldn't. I can appreciate sometimes a prosecutor says, we do not have enough evidence to secure a conviction, so it's a waste of the court's time. But there are clearly cases where they do have evidence and it still doesn't apply. But anyway, what changes can be made to address this issue, bring about civil law costs? Also, is it politically compelling to make such changes? No, because the problem is it's cost, isn't it? Like, for example, like my attitude is this: why is there a distinction between criminal law and civil law? A law exists to discourage what are considered harmful behaviours. You know, if a particular type of behaviour is considered harmful to an individual or society, we legislate against it, right? So you bring in legislation in order to dissuade people from certain harmful behaviours. So if a behaviour is harm, why have we got this distinction between civil and criminal law? Why isn't there just the law? And if you feel that someone has broken the law and you are a victim, you go to the police, and then publicly funded police and prosecutors will investigate and decide if it's worth charging. Why isn't that the case? Why? I'm not a legal historian, but I'm going to guess cost, because you'd massively increase the costs of policing and Crown Prosecution Service. So that's what I would guess. I don't know, but that's what I would guess. Anyway, I'll go last comment here because I have to finish off. I am streaming again all this afternoon on Twitch, so you know, we can talk about whatever over there up from 1 o'clock. Worst part is that our laws are so complicated you need a lawyer to help you wade through it. I think there is now legal principle that laws should be interpreted how Lay people would. No, I don't think that. No, we do need experts to interpret the law, but those experts are judges, right? You don't need a lawyer to help you, but is there a way of making them more? The problem is a lay person can reasonably misinterpret a law. And part of the reason is, I'll just give you an example. There's lots of examples, but one really good example. So you can read a passage of legislation, right? So you can read something in law and you go, okay, I think I understand that. I get that and how it applies to that. But then what you may not be aware of is there might be something in another piece of legislation which adds further context, which completely changes the meaning. That's why you need legal experts, because you can't just, anyone can read a piece of legislation, and as long as you've got some experience, you can sort of understand what it's getting at. But another piece of legislation in conjunction might change its meaning. So that's why you need experts. And that's why, even a lawyer isn't an expert. Like, you can be an expert in human rights law, you can expert in public law, or an expert in commercial law. So an expert in commercial law is not an expert in public law. And the reason for that is they're all of these top lawyers, all of these KCs, the senior barristers, they're all as good as each other at reading laws. They all understand the legal vernacular, the legalese, so to speak. But an expert in commercial law is personally familiar with commercial law. So they know that they read this bit, but they know there's another bit over there, right? Whereas an expert in public law doesn't. So that's why you have these specialists in law. And probably because we have so many laws and they change all the time, it would be different if we had a settled society where we didn't need to change laws very often, where we had laws and they lasted for a long time. Maybe then you wouldn't. But I think the fact that you have a lot of laws and the fact that we change them all the time means you're always going to need experts in understanding and interpreting them. But there we go there. But thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day. As I say, I shall be popping over to Twitch in like 23 minutes. Until next time, I'll see you later.